Okay, the moment we have been waiting for, the conclusion of James and the Giant Peach. We are going to read together the rest of this. This is chapter 37, 38, and 39. And then when you're done, make sure you guys take the AR test for this. So are you ready? Here we go, chapter 37. It's been a great story so far, hasn't it? I enjoy this book every time I read it. It was really an amazing sight, and in 2 or 3 minutes, as soon as the people below realized that this now couldn't possibly be a bomb, they came pouring out of the shelters and the subways to gape at the marvel. The streets for half a mile around the building were jammed with men and women when the word spread that they were actually living things moving on top of the great brown ball. Then everybody went wild with excitement. "It's a flying saucer," they shouted. "They're from outer space. They're men from Mars." Or maybe they came from the moon. And the men and a man who had a pair of binoculars to his eyes said, "They look pretty peculiar to me, I'll tell you that." Police cars and fire engines came screaming from all over the city and pulled up outside the Empire State Building. 200 firemen and 600 policemen swarmed into the buildings and went up to the elevators as high as they could go. Then they poured out onto the observation roof, which is the place where tourists stand just at the bottom of the big spike. All of the policemen were holding their guns at the ready with their fingers on the trigger, and the firemen were clutching their hatchets. But from where they stood, almost directly underneath the Peach, they couldn't actually see the travelers up on top. "Ahoy there!" shouted the chief of police. "Come down and show yourselves!" Suddenly, the great brown head of the centipede appeared over the side of the Peach. His black eyes, as large and as round as 2 marbles, glared down at the policemen and the firemen below. Then his monstrous, ugly face broke into a wide grin. The policemen and the firemen all started shouting at once. "Look out!" they cried. "It's a dragon! It's not a dragon, it's a wampus! It's a Gordon, it's a sea serpent, it's a proc, it's a manticore." The firemen and the 5 policemen fainted, and 5 policemen had fainted and had to be carried away. It's a snozwanger," cried the chief of police. "It's a wangdoodle," yelled the head of the fire department. The centipede kept on grinning. He seemed to be enjoying enormously the commotion that he was causing. "Now see here," shouted the chief of police, cupping his hands to his mouth. "You listen to me. I want you to tell me exactly where you're from." "We've come from 1,000 miles away," the centipede shouted back, grinning more broadly than ever, showing his brown teeth. "There you are," cried the chief of police. "I told you they came from Mars." "I guess you're right," said the head of the fire department. At this point, the old green grasshopper poked his green head over the side of the Peach alongside the centipedes. 6 more big, strong men fainted when they saw him. "That one's an onyx," screamed the head of the fire department. "I just know it's an unk." "It's a cockatrice," said the chief of police. "Stand back, men. It may jump down on us at any moment." "What on earth are you talking about?" the old green grasshopper said to the centipede. "Search me," the centipede answered, "but they seem to be in an awful stew of something." Then Miss Spider's large, black, monstrous-looking head, which to a stranger was probably the most terrifying of all, appeared next to the grasshoppers. "Snakes and ladders!" yelled the head of the fire department. "We are finished now. It's a scorpula." "It's worse than that," cried the chief of police. "It's a venomous knind. Look at its venomous, gruesome face." Is that the kind that eats fully grown men for breakfast?" the head of the fire department asked, going white as a sheet. "I'm afraid it is," answered the chief of police. "Oh, please, why doesn't someone help us get down from here?" Miss Spider called out. "It's making me giddy." "This could be a trick," said the head of the fire department. "Don't anyone make a move until I say." They've probably got space guns," muttered the chief of police. "But we've got to do something," the head of the fire department announced grimly. About 5 million people are standing down there on the streets watching us. Then why don't you put up a ladder? The chief of police asked him. I'll stand at the bottom and hold it steady for you while you go up and see what's happening. Thank you very much, snapped the head of the fire department. Soon there was no less than 7 large, fantastic faces peering down off the side of the Peach, and the centipede, the old green grasshopper, Miss Spiders, the earthworms, the ladybugs, and the silkworms, and the glowworms. And a sort of panic was beginning to break out among the firemen and the policemen on the rooftop. Then, all at once, the panic stopped, and a great gasp of astonishment went up all around. For now, a small boy was seen standing up beside the other creatures. His hair was blowing in the wind, and he was laughing and waving and calling below, "Hello, everybody, hello!" For a few minutes, the men below just stood and gaped. They simply could not believe their eyes. This is a great picture. Look at this. The guys have all passed out. They're so scared. Bless my soul, cried the head of the fire department, going red in the face. It really is a little boy, isn't it? Don't be frightened of us, please, James called out. We're so glad to be here. What about those others beside you? shouted the chief of police. Are any of them dangerous? Oh, of course they're not dangerous, James answered. They're the nicest creatures in the world. Allow me to introduce them to you one by one, and I'm sure you will believe me. My friends, this is Centipede, and let me make it known, he is so sweet and gentle, although he's overgrown. The Queen of Spain again and again has summoned him by phone to babysit and sing and knit and to be a chaperone. When nurse is off and all the royal children are all alone, small wonder, said the fireman. They're no longer on the throne. So that's a little earthworm or centipede. The earthworm, on the other hand, said James, beginning to expand, is great for digging up the land and making old soils newer. Moreover, you should understand, he would be absolutely grand for digging subway tunnels and making you a sewer. The earthworm blushed and beamed with pride. Miss Spider clapped and cheered and cried, could any word be truer? Even the earthworm's kind of happy. I'm not saying something. And the grasshopper, ladies and gents, is a boon in millions and millions of ways. You have only have to ask him, and you only have to ask him to give you a tune, and he plays and he plays and he plays. As a toy for your children, he's perfectly sweet. There's nothing so good in the shops. You've only to tickle the soles of his feet, and he hops and he hops and he hops. He can't be very fierce, exclaimed the head of all the cops. And now, without excuse, I'd like to introduce this charming glowworm, lover of simplicity. She is easy to install on your ceiling or on your wall. And although this smacks a bit of eccentricity, it's really rather clever. For therefore, you will never have the slightest need for electricity, at which no less than 52 policemen cried, if this is true, that creature will get some fabulous publicity. Ta-da! Who's next? Spider? And here we have brave Miss Spider, with a mile of thread inside her, who has personally requested me to say that she's never met Miss Muffet or on her charming little tuffet. And if she had, she'd not have frightened her away. Should her looks sometimes alarm you, then I won't think it would harm you to repeat at least 100 times a day, I must never kill a spider. I must only help and guide her, and invite her to the nursery to play. The police all nodded slightly, and the firemen smiled politely. How about and about a dozen people cried, "Hooray!" Okay, looks like Ladybug's next. And here's my darling Ladybug, so beautiful and kind. My greatest comfort since this trip began. She has 400 children she's left behind. But they're coming on the next peach, if they can. The crops cried, she's entrancing. The firemen started dancing, and the crowds all started cheering to the man. And now the silkworm, James went on, whose silk will bear comparison with the great silks there are in Rome and Philadelphia, if you were to search the whole world through, from Paraguay to Timbuktu. I don't think you would find one bit of silk that could compare with it. Even the shops in Singapore don't have the stuff. And what is more, the silkworm had, I'll have you know, the honor not so long ago to spin and weave and sew and press the Queen of England's wedding dress. And she's already made and sent a waistcoat for your president. Well, good for her, the cops cried out, and all at once a mighty shout went up all around the Empire State. Well, let them down. Why wait? Time to get off of that peach. 5 minutes later, they were safely down, and James was excitedly telling the story to the group of flabbergasted officials. And suddenly, everyone who had come over to the peach was a hero. They were all escorted to the steps of City Hall, where the mayor of New York made a speech of welcome. And while he was doing this, 100 steeplejacks, armed with ropes and ladders and pulleys, swarmed to the top of the Empire State Building and lifted the giant peach off the spike, lowering it to the ground. Then the mayor shouted, "We must have a ticker-tape parade for our wonderful visitors." And so a procession was formed, and the leading car, which was an enormous open limousine, sat James and all his friends. Next came the giant peach itself. Men with cranes and hooks had quickly hoisted it onto a large truck. There it now sat, looking as huge and as proud and brave as ever. There was, of course, a bit of a hole at the bottom of it where the spike of the Empire State Building had gone in, but who cared about that? Or indeed that peach juice was dripping all over the street. Behind the peach, skidded all over the place. In the peach juice came the mayor's limousine, and behind the mayor's limousine came about 20 other limousines carrying all the important people of the city. And the crowd went wild with excitement. They leaned out the windows of the skyscrapers, cheering and yelling and screaming and clapping and throwing bits of white paper and ticker tape. And James and his friends stood up in their car and waved back at them as they went by. Then a rather curious thing happened. The procession was moving slowly along Fifth Avenue when suddenly a little girl in a red dress came out from the crowd and shouted, "Oh, James, could I please just have a tiny piece of that marvelous peach?" "Help yourself," James answered back. "Eat all you want. I won't keep forever anyway." No sooner had he said this than about 50 other children exploded out of the crowd and came running onto the street. "Can we have some too?" they cried. "Of course you can," James answered. "Everyone can have some." The children jumped onto the truck and swarmed like ants all over the giant peach, eating to their heart's content. And as the news of what happened spread quickly from street to street, more and more boys and girls came running from all directions to join the feast. Soon there was a trail of children a mile long chasing the peach as it proceeded slowly up Fifth Avenue. Really, it was a fantastic sight. To some people, it looked as though the Pied Piper of Hamelin had suddenly descended upon New York, and to James, who had never dreamed that there could be so many children in all the world, it was the most marvelous thing that had ever happened. But by the time the procession was over, the whole gigantic fruit had been completely eaten up, and only the big brown stone in the middle, licked clean and shiny by 10,000 eager little tongues, was left standing on the truck. That's the peach before it was eaten. Okay, this is it. Chapter 39, our last chapter. And thus, the journey ended. But the travelers lived on. Every one of them became rich and successful in the new country. The centipede was made vice president in charge of sales of a high-class firm of boot and shoe manufacturers. The earthworm, with his lovely pink skin, was employed by a company who made women's face creams to speak commercials on television. The silkworm and Miss Spider, after they had both been taught to make nylon thread instead of silk, set up a factory together and made ropes for tightwalk ropers. The glowworm became the light inside the torch of the Statue of Liberty and thus saved the grateful city for having to pay a huge electricity bill every year. The old green grasshopper became a member of the New York Symphony Orchestra, where his playing was greatly admired. The ladybug had been haunted all her life for fear that her house was on fire and her children were gone, married the head of the fire department and lived happily ever after. As for the enormous peach stone, it was set up permanently in the place of honor in Central Park and became a famous monument. But it was not only a famous monument, it was also a famous house. And inside the famous house lived a very famous person, James Henry Trotter himself. And all you had to do any day of the week was to go and knock upon the door, and the door would always be open to you, and you would always be asked to come inside and see the famous room where James had first met his friends. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you would find the old green grasshopper in there as well, resting peacefully in a chair before the fire. Or perhaps you would find the ladybug who dropped in for a cup of tea and gossip, or the centipede to show off a new batch of particularly elegant boots that he had just acquired. Every day of the week, hundreds and hundreds of children from far and near came pouring into the city to see the marvelous peach stone in the park. And James Henry Trotter, who once, if you remember, had been the saddest and loneliest little boy that you could ever find, now had all the friends and playmates in the world. This is that picture. It's kind of a cute picture, huh? And because so many of them were always begging for him to tell and tell again the story of his adventures of the peach, he thought it would be nice if one day he sat down and wrote a book. So he did. And that is what you have just finished reading. That's it. That's it. James and the Giant Peach. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining me on this little adventure, especially for those of you guys that have been on this from the beginning. This was not what I intended on doing with this book. I thought we were going to read this together. I thought we would have our little Peach Festival, which, by the way, be looking for details on that in Google Classroom, because I'll post what we can do instead, and let's just have fun with it. This is peach season, by the way. You can get some delicious peaches at the store right now, so this kind of comes at a really good time. Okay, I guess that's about it, guys. Again, I hope you guys are doing well. I really miss you. I love you guys, and hopefully we will be together soon. Take care. Bye.